the two constituencies that went hardest, that swung hardest for Trump. It was white men who we knew that's how they were going to vote. It was white women who still voted despite the deep and open disrespect shown to them by Donald Trump and especially by J.D. Vance. And it was Latino men who swung hard toward Donald Trump. And so I think what we've seen is we had essentially an Argentina election, where you also had an election that was a hardcore surge of men, of men who were disgruntled with the liberalizing of society, and men who want a more authoritarian form of government, more control, and less social liberalism. There's nothing she could have done to change the way those men think. Going on Joe Rogan wouldn't have helped. None of the things none of it would have changed, because she is the thing that they don't want, a black woman seeking power.
I totally agree, having been on winning campaigns and losing campaigns, that when you sit there at the forums, I know maybe that's another norm that Trump has killed, but you used to go with both sides and sit there, and the campaign that won would get all the accolades, and the campaign that lost would have to sort of confess to all their sins. And the truth is usually somewhere in between, right? There's often something structural afoot. And it seems, and again, I'm in the early stages of trying to learn myself from what was told, but it seems that there may be some insurmountable perception and reality of economic rage that was beyond people's personal household strain and stress and agony of the price of things that cost their family more, but also deep despair about kids that couldn't find work, or kids that had moved back home, or neighbors that were, I mean, it feels like it was widespread and potentially insurmountable.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump turned out that he knew our country better than we did. And I'm not sure I agree with a lot of what Joy said, but I think a lot of this is not the candidates, it's the country. And I think Donald Trump understood that what he could do, and I don't think his mistakes were mistakes. Mm-hmm. I think his mistakes were strategic and turned out to be right on the money, because I think our party, I grew up in a party where we were for the underdog. We were for the little guy. We are now the elite. We are no longer seen as the party for the little guy. He was seen as the party for the little guy. He was seen as the ultimate disruptor. And yes, the edges were very rough, but in everyone's own minds, they sanded them down to the point of acceptability. And as it turns out, there's a lot of craving in America for fear and anger. A lot of craving for fear and anger, driven by lies. But nonetheless, what this election result showed, especially if you look what's happened in the blue states, I mean, New Jersey turned out to be relatively close. Mm-hmm. New York, we lost huge ground. Mm-hmm. I mean, if this is not a gut check moment for the Democratic Party to realize that we need to get back to meat and potatoes and fighting like hell for the little guy. And by the way, he'll probably help us here, because I have a feeling he's going to burn the house down. I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't do real damage that we can't recover from. But, and you know, I got to tell you, Joy, those uncommitted folks, you know, the first call he had this morning with Bibi Netanyahu, they're going to level Gaza.
Absolutely. And the West Bank. And not only level Gaza,
and this
but
is
they're going to take over the West Bank.
It's so frustrating to me that people were seeing this as something that wasn't an existential moment in our country. Can the Democratic Party recover? Yes. Is this the end of the world? No. But if anybody thinks this is about her doing something different in her ads or not doing this, they're not paying attention. There is something fundamentally changing in America about how the Democratic Party is perceived.
Can I just say very, very quickly, though, the co-founder of Uncommitted went on our air with our friend, our dear friend Andrea Mitchell, and supported her in the end. And people from the movement were absolutely supporting her. Wajahat Ali went way out on a limb. So Palestinian rights supporters in the end, the prominent ones, the woman who was in Georgia, the state representative who was not allowed to speak at the convention, voted for her and endorsed her. So it was not the Uncommitted movement writ large, but there was enough damage already done. And remember, you had Tiffany Trump's husband, who is Lebanese American, lobbying in Dearborn to try to pull Arab and Muslim American voters. But in the end, you definitely had a push toward her at the end, it just wasn't enough. So
Right.
I wanted to throw that out.
Before we go to the event, John Hellman, and if I interrupt you again, I apologize. You've got an ear to the ground to the folks who study data for a living, and I feel like you were getting some of the most sort of on edge gut checks in the hours before the election in the conversation you and I had Monday afternoon. What are you hearing in terms of what is better understood today than 24 hours ago in terms of the electorate?
Well, I think, boy, there's so many things to say. One, just making our way through here. One, you know, the reality of our economy over the course of the last 30 years has been, you know, we know this story. The plutocracy has all the gains, and if you're in the middle of the middle in America, you live in a place of constant anxiety, bordering on rage. Even in good economies, the gains have not been distributed to the middle class, the lower middle class, even the upper middle class. The vast lion's share of the gains in our economy now go to the super rich. So people are perpetually, they were like this in 2016 too.
Right.
You know, how did you explain 8 years of Barack Obama followed by a bunch of people who voted for Donald Trump and then voted for Joe Biden 4 years later? That's a swing set that voters out there, those people are basically like, nobody's fixing my problems. So they vote for change. They vote for Obama. He disappoints them. They vote for Trump. He disappoints them. They vote for Biden. He disappoints them. And now they're back to Trump because they didn't think that Kamala Harris represented change. But those people are all living in a stew of anxiety, and it's rooted in reality, like their actual standard of living and what they have to offer to their children, their grandchildren, is not the American dream that people once fantasized about and once was real in the post-World War II era. To Claire's point about what the Democratic Party is perceived as, the Democratic Party is now the party of the college-educated professional class. It's not just perceived that way, it is. It's a largely coastal elite party with a bunch of, some of them very well-meaning, some of them very progressive, but many of them very condescending, college-educated, toffee-nosed gits, as they would call them in Britain. And Donald Trump, the realignment that has happened to the parties now is that the Republican Party is comprised of the working class and the non-college, what we call the non-college voters, right? And there are, it's more non-college white than it is non-college black, certainly, but now it's apparently a lot of non-college Latinos. But that is the main dividing line. The sorting in our politics now is not primarily on the basis of race or income. It's on the basis of, and there is correlation between income and college education, but it's education is how our whole coalitions are now divided. That's a huge thing Democrats have to deal with because there's all this cultural baggage that there's a huge amount of cultural positivity attached to college and a huge amount of cultural negativity if you attach to college if you don't go to college. I think that the realities of the macro things, I said this yesterday on the air, that if you won all 7 states, there's one really easy answer to this, which is she was the sitting vice president. Even up to today, her boss is Joe Biden. And fairly or unfairly, he's sitting there with his 38 to 39% approval rating and an economy that people, again, fairly or unfairly, don't think they're not happy with. Right. And the wrong track is at 75. Those headwinds are huge for anybody. If she had come through a primary and had the chance to introduce herself to America and explain over the course of 2 years the way she differed from Biden, the way she would have a different kind of governing philosophy, those headwinds would still have been maybe enough for her to lose the race. But to put her in the position of getting the nomination in August and having her be a relatively unknown figure compared to Donald Trump, compared to Joe Biden, compared to Barack Obama at the end of a year and a half of campaigning in 50 states, or George W. Bush at the end of a year and a half of campaigning in 50 states. Man, the degree of difficulty, I said it yesterday, Donald Trump had one thing to do once she became the nominee: beat the hell out of her. She had 2 things to do: fight in the ring with him, and then also go around to America and introduce herself. That is an unfair fight. And I think I'm entirely with Joy. And anybody who's gonna, well, she had word salad in this town hall. Give me a break. You know, she was the vice president to an unpopular president. With a wrong track number and this incredible high degree of difficulty. She got her convention speech, she knocked it out of the park. She raised $1 billion. She crushed it in the debate, and she closed like a stud. You know, those are the big things, and she did all those things, and yet he still won the popular vote. And so it's about all of this stuff. It's about what's happened to the Democratic Party. It's about the really unfortunate position that she was put in, having to come in that late and take on this incredibly high burden. Imagine if there had been a Democratic primary, a normal Democratic primary, where she and Gretchen Whitmer and all the rest that people fantasize about had been able to fight it out for a normal primary process and had gotten to introduce themselves to the country and gone and done 12 Democratic debates and get well known enough. I don't know anybody in professional politics who doesn't think, given Donald Trump's weaknesses, that nominee, whether it was her, whether it was Kamala Harris, or whether it was any of those other people, wouldn't have been the favorite and would have probably been the prohibitive favorite against the terminally unpopular Donald Trump, even with all the cultural stuff built in. But under the circumstances, man, it's a miracle she got this close.
It's
I mean,
amazing.
given when she had
Yeah.
to take the job.
Yeah. I mean, Michelle Cinder joins us. She's at Howard University. And, Michelle Norris, I think, kind of brought to life how meaningful last night was or could have been, right, if the vice president had delivered an acceptance speech last night. That is not the history that was made last night, but still today an historic moment. She will deliver her concession speech at her alma mater. Take me inside the mood there.
That's right. Yesterday was really, I think, a tough day for the vice president, of course, and for so many of her supporters who had gathered at Howard University. At the beginning of it, it was really jubilant and people felt confident. But by around 10 o'clock, as it was clearer and clearer that former President Trump, now President-elect Trump, was making gains and overperforming in key areas and key battleground states, people really started to get sad. People really started to say this feels like a funeral. People started talking about 2016. And then Vice President Harris made the decision to send out a high-level aide in Cedric Richmond to tell everyone to go home, and she would come back and talk tomorrow. So today I've been talking to campaign officials, and they tell me that she has been working on her concession speech, but that she hadn't spent a lot of time on a concession speech because she was thinking that she was going to be delivering a speech about uncertainty and people waiting for the vote totals. So this is a speech that she really had to put together today, and there's just a lot of, I think, hand-wringing and a lot of questioning now in the Democratic Party about where they go from here. Nicolle.
I went back, Yamiche, and I watched Hillary Clinton's speech, and it's not just an iconic Hillary Clinton speech. It's an iconic moment in American politics if you're a woman. It's an iconic moment in American politics if you were a prognosticator who got that one wrong, who thought that after you said Megyn Kelly was bleeding out of her eyes and her ears and that women wouldn't vote for Trump. It's a phenomenon that we're still living with, right? Actually, I think Megyn Kelly campaigned for Donald Trump this time around. But this opportunity she has today to lay the foundation for the next fire that will burn through the opposition to Donald Trump, who isn't just, as John Howman said, deeply unpopular, but running as an anti-democratic style figure. What opportunity does she see in her remarks today to inspire the next movement against autocracy?
Well, in talking to officials, the vice president feels a couple of different things, and her team feels a couple of different things, which is, one, they want the speech to really hammer home and underscore the idea that she believes in the peaceful transfer of power. Campaign officials have told us that when she had that conversation with President-elect Trump, conceding and congratulating him for his win, that she talked about the peaceful transfer of power. So she really does expect to continue to talk about that. But she also, of course, is going to say that this is now hard work for the Democrats. And she's been saying all along on the campaign trail that hard work is good work, and that a next generation of Americans, she wanted, of course, for her to be part of one of those leaders, but the next generation of Americans can move forward and move the Democratic Party forward. So she has now in this moment to tell people, your hearts are broken. It's very tough. I understand that you're feeling